Hi, I'm Lisa Kereszi. I am a photographer and educator based here in Connecticut, and I organize the exhibition At the Beach and in the Pool on Influence. I'm the assistant director in photography at the Yale School of Art, where I studied under Tod Papageorge. And I graduated and got my own MFA in 2000. The exhibition here is called At the Beach. It is his study of California beaches on 4 separate trips in the 1970s and 80s, in tandem with a group show of Todd's students while he directed the program for over 30 years. So almost 300 people got their MFAs while he was the director of the program from 1979 to 2013. And all of their work is in a 20-minute slideshow. But 41 of those former students had the distinction of getting a Guggenheim Fellowship. And so those 41 people have prints on the wall in the pool on Influence, the exhibition right in the room next door. This all came together very quickly, but I was approached to curate a photography show. One of the no-brainer ideas was my old teacher, Tod Papageorge. Several years ago, another one of our mentors and professors and the former dean of the School of Art, Richard Benson, had passed away, and in the wake of his passing, there was a show and a number of shows and also a book. And we all of us alumni sort of had a reunion, many of us, a couple reunions circling around that. And it was really great to get together with the generations of Yale photographers. You know, this program has been going for decades. And, I like to say that we're a family in many ways. I love that we all got together, and I didn't like that it was for a sad reason, although we were celebrating the life and career and legacy of Richard Benson. And so I thought it was another way for us to all get together again, on the wall, in the slideshow, and also physically at any of the programming and the reception. As an educator myself now for 25 years, I also wanted to not only highlight one of my mentors and this important body of work that actually hasn't been shown on the East Coast or in the Northeast previously. It had been shown in LA, at Danziger, and then also in Cologne at Zonder Gallery. Although there is a book that came out a few years ago with Stanley Barker, this work hadn't been shown in the New York metropolitan area, and certainly not in the state where Tod resides. So as an educator, I love being able to kind of look at the history of the program and look at the different decades of people who were in various cohorts, and sort of be able to kind of walk through the history of the program or sit and watch the history of the program through one piece by each of the participants. I think, Tod, he didn't sit down and teach us how to make a picture, right? But in the weekly critiques, where there's a panel of professional photographers, professionals in the field, but mainly working photographers, including Tod, you find out, you get to see what works and what doesn't by your own work, but also by your peers. And so just that sort of reinforcement, and then also criticism about what works and what doesn't work, it just helps you kind of get an internal dialogue that you kind of create from hearing the dialogue around pictures. And I think we each bring our own vision and our own stories and our own backgrounds and our own histories to every picture we make, every time we take the shutter. But I think for many of us who have gone through the program, we also sort of hear the voices of our professors and our peers in our heads, in a way. Certainly less so as you get further and further away from graduation. I like to say that my internal critique when I make a picture, and then also when I'm editing them later, is a combination of myself and then also every person that I sort of interacted with and who interacted with my work back in school. As an artist myself, I made a lot of space for the artist, the solo show artist, to make decisions. Because as an artist myself, although I do absolutely need and value other people's input, because when you're working with a curator, an editor, designer, etc., you know, they see things in your work that you might not be able to see yourself. But you know, and I think Tod absolutely made space for myself and museum staff to also have our opinions, but I really did heavily, you know, allow the artist to make a lot of decisions, because that's how I think I would want to be treated, while at the same time being able to kind of make suggestions about what goes where. But really, this space is perfect. You know, there's this big open space where one body of work by an artist can really spread out and have a lot of air and have a lot of space between the images. But then there's this entryway before we get into this room that is sunken down, not unlike the critique space at Yale. The critique space for the photo department is lovingly referred to as the pool, which is really where the title of the group show comes from, in the pool. And we even stepped down several steps to get into the old pool of the JCC in New Haven, which was renovated into one of the several buildings of the Yale School of Art. Just that room that the group show is in a way, mimics our critique space, and it even feels a bit like a pool that you go down into and you enter. The director and exhibitions director and I all, when we were putting together the group show, it really felt like, you know, we were using that space as a metaphor for a pool, you know, a place where you have to do laps, you have to practice back and forth, and it's sink or swim. Swimming as metaphor for the practice of art making and photography specifically, just, you know, was a big part of the planning for this exhibition, but also something that's in all of our minds in the program. And then I'll also say, you know, there's this great small room where we were able to put out some books and put a small selection from another summary body of work of Tod's, Central Park. And then there's a video room, which we were able to not just highlight 41 people out of the 300-ish of us, but we were able to have a small room with a 20-minute projection looping where we were able to see everyone. So you can sit in that room and really get a sense of the cohorts blending into one another and influencing one another. At the beach, there's a photograph that I would like to have myself on my wall at the side of a volleyball net. And there is an oil drum, like kind of a crunched oil drum trash can, and a young woman in a bikini bottom, and then a crop top that says "Save the Whales" standing behind it.
Because it's almost 50 years old, and I knew right away that was me. I remember the bathing suit really, really well. It was my favorite bathing suit.
But you know, the reason why I've zeroed in on that image is actually super subjective, and it's totally personal. So, and it's kind of silly, but I think, and I'll explain it, but you know, I think it highlights one of the ways that we as audiences do engage with work. You know, we bring a lot of ourselves when we engage with a photograph or a painting or a piece of artwork. There's a lot of our own histories that we bring to it that might be something as, you know, academic or highfalutin, you know, as a connection with a great piece of literature or music that we've experienced, and then we recognize it again in a piece of art. And when I was interviewing Tod for the booklet we have, you know, he often referenced classical music or painting. It can also be something personal. When I was at Bard College studying with Stephen Shore and Larry Fink in the 90s, one of the very first photo classes I took, probably the second or third photo class, was with Stephen Shore. It was a view camera class. And one of the things that I did as a project in that class is I went to a scrapyard in the Hudson Valley and got permission to photograph there, and I used black and white 4x5 film. And one of the pictures that I thought was the most successful, although very straightforward and very subject driven, it was a picture of a vertical, sort of a portrait of a crunched oil drum can, just like that. And I always thought of it as my nod to the famous Edward Weston's Pepper. So I see that in this image. My pepper was an oil drum. So it's all very personal why I'm zeroing in on that image of Tod's. But also, in the group show, I also want to mention, when I walk through and look at the 41 pictures, I do stop in my tracks for two different reasons in there. One is I see very famous photographs in that show by, in particular, Philip Lorca de Corsia, the picture of his brother Mario looking into a refrigerator. That is an iconic picture in 20th century photography, in color photography, in de Corsia's body of work, right? Which is semi-staged. Staged, but there's basis in reality. Also, if you see Mark Steinmetz's picture, which I think is from Central Park, that's a picture that has stayed in his body of work. There are photographs by Laura Latinsky, David Hilliard, Andrea Modica, that have stayed in the canon, in their work, in their bodies of work, that have stayed strong and are still similar to the way they work now. Also Lois Connor, there's an inkjet print of an 8x10 platinum print of a tree, still very similar to the way she works. But then I also get stopped in my tracks when I see an artist whose name I know, but whose print from their student time was very different, it seems, from their practice today, such as Tanya Marcuse, Henri Millet, Abe Morel. Very different than the pictures of theirs I see today. But then there's someone like Dawood Bey, and then the portrait of Lorna Simpson, it echoes, what sort of came to be in his body of work. Tod was not alone in mentoring us, but he was the director, so he would have the last word. And you also sort of waited with bated breath for his last word.
For me, it's making strong pictures. And as I told you before, I didn't really understand in many cases what those pictures were for many years. So it's an interrogation, really. You have this medium, it literally, in photography, is a medium between you and the world. To negotiate your understanding of that and your understanding of the medium itself, how to make it more interesting and complex and be more successful at that as you go on.
And he also was the person who would make the decisions about who else was on the critique panel, who the faculty were, what the curriculum would be, who the visiting artists were. And he worked with the other faculty to decide who would be admitted every year. But I think that there's this thing I didn't realize until I was walking out the door graduating or having recently graduated, that I didn't fully grasp until the 2 years had come to a close. But there was something that Tod speaks about a fair amount that I think is sort of, for me, I think it's the key. So besides working so hard and having a critique every month while you're in school, and then you're seeing the critique of and critiquing in conversation with everyone else's work, all of your cohort, and then you're being exposed to different visiting artists and different slideshows. Tod would do these amazing lectures on different photographers that ends up being cemented in his book, of Essay's core curriculum. Those are essay versions of the photo history lectures that he gave us over the course of the 2 years. But there was this thing, this idea that I think was sort of the central idea, is that photography isn't reality. It isn't the truth. Photography in any lens-based medium is indexical, right? So light is bouncing off of a surface, being reflected back to the camera, whether it contains film or a digital sensor, right? Bounces back and is recorded on some kind of a medium, light-sensitive medium. And so therefore, the thing in front of the camera that had light hit it has to be the thing that is recorded, right? And so yes, that's the concept of photography, or at least, was. But, once you start doing it, it's not really about that subject entirely. Yes, sure, this is the beaches of LA in the 70s and 80s, and it's light, it's bodies in bathing suits on the beach, right? It's more than that. I think you really come to understand something about crafting an image, crafting a picture, crafting a photograph that is akin to, not the same as a painting. Like a painting is additive, right? You start with a blank canvas and then you add to it. Photography, I think, is subtractive. You've got the whole world, right? That could be your canvas, but you have to zero in and put 4 lines around just a little piece of it, right? And it's a little piece of it that is at a very specific split second in time with a certain exposure, so it's darker or lighter or too dark or too light according to your exposure, certain time of day. Different lights have different colors, have different emotional resonance. We see in color, so when it's color, that's a different set of references and things that we think about than black and white. A black and white photograph is not reality. We generally, most of us don't see in black and white, right? So there's all of that, right? It's a abstraction. It's an abstraction of reality, right? Also, that thing I said earlier about an audience member coming to a piece of art and bringing baggage, bringing everything they've ever seen, everything they've ever felt, every love song they've ever heard, every beach trip they've ever made, they're bringing all of that when they're understanding a piece of art. But as an artist, you're also bringing all of that into the studio or out onto the street or out onto the beach. And the decision to press that shutter here or there, up, down, framing this, choosing to highlight that, choosing to transform, you're transforming the stuff of the world through the camera. But you're making all those choices consciously and subconsciously in a split second when you make the exposure, right? And so Tod is thinking about Chaucer. Tod is thinking about Titian. He's thinking about all of these different things, as well as maybe growing up not far from the coast in New Hampshire, and having a very different experience of the beach than these people's experience of the beach. But, I think that nugget, that photography isn't reality anyway. And so, yes, photojournalism and documentary photography with a capital D do need to adhere to as close to the truth or neutrality as possible for reporting and for showing us the world. But if you're an artist, you're showing us the world through your eyes at a split second. This is not the world everyone else sees. This is the world that Tod Papageorge saw on those very specific trips. And I think you see that in the work of the students. So I don't know how readily the development of a Gregory Crutzen, of a Philip Lorca de Corsia, of a Mallory Marder, or any other number of people who do create fictions in their photographs. I think Tod he set the stage for that to be okay. I mean, yes, people have staged photographs throughout the history of photography the entire time. Julia Margaret Cameron, those are not portraits that are meant to be seeing into the soul of those portrait sitters. Those people are posing, acting as characters from literature and mythology and drama, right? So photography from the very beginning was always something that wasn't necessarily adhering to the truth, and had a basis in the dramatic arts. But I think Tod allowed us to wield our artistic license with either a very heavy hand, like Kereszi, or something in between, like DeCorsia, or even for myself, I will move a piece of trash or a soda can either out of the frame or into the frame in order to create a better composition. And we're all different, and I think Tod and Co. really allowed us to be ourselves. And I think he really, he does not take credit for our work. He does not take credit for our success. He talked about something between, I think he said he wanted to give us something stronger than a pinprick to heal from, I think. He didn't say that, but I think, you have to heal from a pinprick. But also to react to and to get stronger after, receiving, as far as our practice as an artist. And I think he really gave us the push and the impetus, but I think he really understood that you don't get in an artist's way. You might help them along, but you don't get in someone's way, and you don't try to mold someone into something they're not, or your own image as a teacher. So the interview booklet that we have available here is distilled down from about 5 hours of conversation. So there's more that we discuss than ends up in the booklet. Also, an even more abbreviated version, narrowing it down even further, is on the Aperture website. This morning, I was thinking about one thing that I didn't really ask him point blank, and something as a teacher and as a parent, I think about people's paths, and I think about chance. And I think about the lives we live and the careers we carve out, and how a decision, one little decision that doesn't seem like a big deal, can lead you down a path. There's a decision I made after graduating college that absolutely led me to going to the School of Art and subsequently teaching there, and then subsequently sitting right here talking to you. And it was a small decision about a post-graduating job at a photo lab. And it all led here through a meandering way. But, I don't think I asked him what he would have done with his life had he not discovered the work of Cartier-Bresson and Versailles and decided to be a photographer. And he did take a photo class in undergrad. I don't think I asked him that question because I think I knew the answer. And I think the answer is to be a writer. And he's a fantastic writer still. I could be wrong that that's not the answer that he would have given, but I think that's why I didn't ask it. I think that as a photographer, I hope that people aren't just, in this solo show, that it's not just about the subject of the beach in the 70s and 80s where everybody looks like they're from another time, yet also they look like they could have been taken today in some ways, right? And I think Tod doesn't want that reading either. But I think that is something, that's part of it, right? That is part of what I think people are going to come and experience and enjoy. They're going to enjoy the fashion. They're going to enjoy the hairstyles. And I think that's great. That's fine. But I also want you to think about the photographic medium. I want you to think about the choices the photographer made when they pressed the shutter, I want you to think about the choices a photographer makes. Then, when they look at their contact sheet and then choose that picture out of hundreds or thousands to then make a print of and show on the wall, right? So Tod took thousands of pictures on 6x9 centimeter negatives with a pretty big medium format camera, not on a tripod. No flash here. I want you to think about photography transforming the world. And I want you to think about that it's a medium as valid and difficult as painting, you know? Sure, a lot of photographers say, oh, I became a photographer because I'm not a good painter. I mean, I say that, and I've heard other people say that. But, you know, it's painting, we all know, is not just about making something figurative look photorealistic. Otherwise, I guess you'd take a picture. But I just want you to think about what light does on surfaces, whether that surface is a lawn chair or an oil drum trash can or skin or hair. And just also think about how we relate to one another in public. I just love how there's so much going on in these pictures, and you know, I don't know that the people in these pictures have that much memory of these exact times or these days. And I love that photography can preserve these moments and these beach days and these days of youth and these days of pleasure. You know, and I think this exhibition keeps on giving.
At the opening here, there are a lot of graduates from the program present. And one of the most striking things to me was their reaction to the show. Not just they liked it, but their understanding of the pictures in every possible way. What the pictures represented as kinds of you know, physical, aesthetic, musical solutions to the problems of making photographs. And I found that very, very gratifying because I felt that, of course, I had to feel that in some sense they had learned that. They had learned that love and the specificity of it from me and from the program. And the idea of that fact, and the fact that many of them are out in the world teaching, and that others of them are out in the world showing their work, was very, very moving to me, I must say, and surprising. It's something I didn't expect at all.
And it continues.
I'm sure it does, yeah.